Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys. I'm your host, Daniel Torres. Hello, Efrain. How are you doing?
Good, Daniel. Nice to be with you as always.
Likewise. So coming down to the end of the calendar year, what are brands in your experience typically working on? Like, what are the teams engaged in this time of the year?
Well, my experience has been that this time of year is usually really focused on planning for the coming year, whether that be fiscal or whether that be calendar. So most teams are heads down, focused on their annual brand and commercial plans. And, that encompasses looking a look back in terms of like the prior years to see what worked and what could have been better, but also thinking about what they do going forward, right? So how do they look at a full funnel media and commercial plan and how they bring that to life?
And what are what do you think are the new ideas or elements that they should consider for 2024?
I don't know if it's necessarily new, but I would say that e-commerce just continues to grow in terms of importance, right? So, understanding the role of digital to be able to drive performance, but I think what may be slightly new or newer for teams is thinking about digital or e-commerce, not just in terms of driving purchase conversion or bottom of the funnel type of activities, but really thinking about what it can do in terms of brand building to drive awareness. And, to me, I think retail media sits right at the center of this.
Yeah, well, I think that our guest today will be able to help us and our listeners really strategize for 2024. So we'll be lucky to be accompanied by Mandy Critchley. She's an account director at CommerceIQ and really keen to hear about how she's helping her clients win in commerce in 2024. Hi, Mandy. Thanks for joining us so much. What does it mean to be Global Account Director at CommerceIQ?
So as a Global Account Director, I'm the key lead with our client stakeholders. So my role is to really get under the skin and have a clear understanding of their strategic objectives, and then to be the link bringing together our internal stakeholders too, to make sure that we're aligned on how we support and deliver against those global commercial objectives, utilising and using all of our knowledge, but also all of our products and services across CommerceIQ globally.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about external stakeholders, who are them? Who are they?
So it depends on how the company is set up, obviously, but they are your global acceleration e-com leads and also the market leads as well within the different individual countries.
So you've had an interesting career path getting to where you are right now with CommerceIQ. And I know some of that has been as a result of M&A activity in the industry as well. But
yes.
I would just be curious to hear more about your background in terms of like what got you to where you are today as a global account director at CommerceIQ.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it wasn't really a straight line, I would say. I started off in publishing, in media sales in publishing in London. But for the last, I would say, sort of 20 odd years, I've been working, first of all, in brand media. And then moving on to, I work for my supermarket into retail media and partnerships through retail media, and then also into the digital shelf analytics space. So from testing and learning about different types of content through to really understanding how to embed the actions within a business to drive better digital shelf analytics scores, if you like, and then through to really the now full range of CommerceIQ products. So it's always been about driving growth and driving sales growth, but it's gone from brand to retail to analytics as we've moved through.
Yeah, well, it's great that you can follow like the parts of the business that are growing, no? Because it's not always a given.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you've spent the last 20 years in retail. Interesting as well that before that you spent 10 years in publishing. So really it's great after 10 years that you were able to use those transferable skills to move to another industry. But focusing on the retail space, how have you seen the landscape change in the last 20 years?
Oh, well, it's changed hugely in the last 20 years. I think it's changed even more so in the last sort of 5 or 6 years. So, retail media has always been about, or the retail media landscape's always been about driving sales during the path to purchase. I think, firstly, we've seen a great deal of change as we've gone through COVID into the post-COVID era of higher prices, smaller margins, bigger competition globally. And that's driven quite a lot of change. So I think we've seen a number of things. We've seen shoppers move online into their shopping mix in greater numbers and in a more permanent fashion. That was driven by COVID. It was always starting to happen, but accelerated by that. We've seen shoppers increasingly split their shops across multiple different retailers as they are looking to get more for their money. And that's, by its nature, has seen an almost permanent shift to discounters. We've seen Aldi's figures recently around a shift into Aldi. And as part of that, I think we've seen private label grow in much bigger numbers. Shoppers seem much more willing now to switch into private label brands, and that's partly driven by discounters, but obviously driven by prices as well. We've seen retailers looking for efficient and more profitable ways to grow their online delivery offering. So, for example, you have the hookups between Aldi, Waitrose and Deliveroo. And Waitrose, again, looking potentially to sell back through Amazon again. They're looking for those additional ways of delivering to the customer in a more logistically efficient, potentially way. And we've seen the increase in on-demand coming through. So, your 20-minute delivery apps, they're already starting to get from the huge growth stage to a bit of the consolidation coming through within those different markets as well. So I think that's the first part. How have things changed for the shopper, and how's that impacted? And then the second part is the huge proliferation in retail media. We've seen pressure on shoppers' retailer margins, and they've realised that the opportunity to open up a new revenue stream, acting as a publisher essentially, is there for them, and it has huge potential. And that's come at the same time that we've seen the changes around the laws around third-party cookies, and so it's also opened up to them the opportunity of utilising and selling their first-party data as well. And I think that's all been going on at the same time to make for quite a heady mix out there.
So given everything you just said, which is a lot of change that's happened, like you said, within a relatively short amount of time in the last 5 years or so, what would you say are some of the more common challenges that brands are experiencing based on your experience and interaction with them?
I think that as they race to harness the new possibilities that are coming out, I think there are two key challenging areas for them. The first one is, how are they using and connecting their data? So how do they bring all of their data together in a cohesive way that will support their strategies? They typically may have half a dozen different data vendors, suppliers. How are they able to bring all of that together in a way that enables the data to talk to each other, essentially? So, for example, are they using digital shelf data that's showing them where they've got poor visibility from an SEO perspective to understand where they should be spending their retail media from a sponsored search perspective? Are they pulling those two different areas together? Are they using connected data to tell them what they should be doing. The next step is how do they automate that? But I don't think they're there yet. So that's the first challenge. And the second part, I think, is related as well, which is how are they setting themselves up internally for success? So in addition to breaking down data silos, how are they breaking down internal silos as well? Because now we're seeing that these areas are cutting across a number of different marketing roles and functions, and actually sometimes beyond marketing as well. So how are they setting themselves up internally? That's their second big challenge. Are they making sure that their media is supporting their EJBPs, for example? Or how are they looking at feeding in out of stock data? So are they making sure that they're all talking to each other to ensure that what they might be doing from a search perspective within their EJBP is complementing, not contradicting what they're doing from a retail media perspective?
Efrain, you deal with a lot of data in your job. And in this time of omni-commerce, do you sometimes find yourself really not sure with what actions to take?
Absolutely. I think as the amount of e-com performance data only continues to grow, a lot of brands are going to face this challenge.
Well, you should check CommerceIQ. They're a pioneer that are helping consumer brands win in e-commerce by optimizing digital shelf and helping grow market share by driving real-time incrementality for retail media and maximizing Amazon sales, share, and profit.
Sounds really intriguing. How can people find out more?
Well, you should join the hundreds of FMCG brands that are already winning in e-commerce with CommerceIQ. It's as easy as visiting commerceiq.ai/FMCG guys or following the link in the show notes to schedule a demo and download their free AI-powered Chrome plugin to optimize your Amazon listings. Don't miss out. Take action today to unlock your AI-powered e-commerce success with CommerceIQ. And actually, along the lines of building that internal structure, how do you see like that split between global e-commerce and then local e-commerce? Because that's a very challenging one, because obviously there's a lot of common things that you can share at global level, but then there's a lot of local specificities. So,
I mean, there is, isn't there? I think it is a big challenge. Different countries have different levels of e-commerce maturity within the country as a whole, and it's not even just about different levels of maturity. They have different approaches as well. I mean, we see, for example, in some areas of Europe, countries, online shopping is almost entirely done for grocery through mobile apps. But we don't see that in other countries, and they're very different sort of channels for delivery. And then we see that companies have different levels of maturity within their, not maturity is probably not the right words, different levels of resource within their own internal teams. So thinking about how they're supporting globally, but also being able to flex from a local perspective, I think is quite important. I think some of the areas where I see it best is where they do just that. They set up a global framework and then they enable local flexing from within that framework, but with the global support.
It's still probably a big, power struggle, if you like, between the two forces.
Yeah, absolutely. And finding the balance between sharing the global capability and allowing the local flexibility, I think is a tightrope that most companies are walking as well.
Yeah, we tend to refer to it as, or maybe I personally refer to it as, freedom within a framework. Matt, you want to give people, like you said, that flex, but you want to give them some form of structure in terms of how to think about it. Because at least my perspective has always been that frees you up to then be able to think about that fun, creative part of your job that you really enjoy doing as well. So,
yeah.
So we've alluded to it already, and I think given your background, you're really well equipped to answer this next question, which is the role of data and analytics within setting strategy at some of these global brands. And I'm curious to get your perspective on what you observed in working with large brands in FMCG.
I think that they are starting to get to grips with what's available to them in order to be able to pull together their strategy. So data and analytics obviously plays a really foundational part, right from benchmarking current positions on the digital shelf, for example, understanding where they fit within the category, opportunities, white space for growth. And then right the way through to the tech, we see that enables for retail media delivery or any kind of delivery and optimization and measurement of that. So bringing the data sets together to try to break down these silos and not duplicating efforts is really where brands are starting to win. And I think some of the cases I've seen that have been successful is where they've taken test and learn approaches and then use that to scale up as well, and using the analytics to support that scaling.
Mm-hmm. And is there like some type, like going back to the internal structure part, is there like some like way that you see ideal for teams to get together and really be on the same page?
I think it's different when we're talking about data and people. I think there is a data solution that we're very close to that is nearly there, that will provide that will enable all of the data to come in and be used together to support the outputs that come out. And that's a data solution. It doesn't necessarily, it requires breaking down of data silos but not necessarily of different teams. You could have someone in logistics taking the information out equally as you could have somebody in brand team taking it out. I think from a people team perspective, it's similar to the answer to the global local. It's about having an overall framework and then the flexibility within it. But I do think it's important to have an understanding between the teams. So some kind of maybe internal champion within each of the marketing teams that's pulling together and understanding at high level of all of those strategies and how they're fitting together.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. What about retail media? So obviously there's a huge hype around it right now. How do you help your accounts maximize this opportunity when we're talking about the brands?
Yeah, there is a huge hype about it at the moment, and it's clear that budgets are being switched into retail media from other channels in quite a large number. And I think stepping away from just that as a fact and thinking about what's driving that helps to understand how to make the most out of it. I think it's been driven by a number of different things. I mean, if we leave the retailer's additional revenue stream to one side and think about more what it means to brands, we know that changes in online customer behavior is one of the key drivers. So shoppers are increasingly researching online and building their shopping list online. That's happening in greater number, and they're using retailer sites in order to do that in greater number. So that change in behavior is really important as well. The importance of them of building a first-party data operation is starting to drive that through as well. And I think the ability to scale and a new understanding of the ability to scale is the other thing around of the growth in retail media. The reason it is so successful at all of those things is it enables brands to meet really specific objectives through its targeting. So whether or not that's targeting competitor shoppers and switching them, launching MPD, winning back lapsed shoppers, there is a way to target retail media to meet every single one of those objectives, and also to enable that to be amplified, if you like, outside of retailer sites using first-party data. So I think that's the changes that are happening, and that's the opportunities that are open to brands. I think important within that is choosing partners and networks that enable brands to really take those learnings and optimize by them. It's not just about switching spend, it's making sure that really understanding what that spend is delivering. And then the final bit, I think the final opportunity, which we're not quite there on, but we're getting really close to, is breaking down the data silos to bring the bits and pieces of data together in order to make sure that the opportunities in retail media are being realized by a full understanding of the data that underpins it. So, for example, you are not running retail media that is promoting products that your digital shelf analytics are telling you you're about to go out of stock on. So that kind of joined up thinking, really.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that last example, because it's a great segue to asking about product content, right? Which is that in order to really make retail media sing, you have to have amazing content to really, in essence, engage with consumers effectively. So we have already asked you about one of the big trending topics. Let's ask about the other one, which is, how have you seen that automation and Gen AI can help in terms of making that product content really, really engage with consumers and shoppers effectively?
Yeah, it is really interesting, actually. So, and it is a big change that's coming through. So if I think about sort of my early days in digital shelf analytics, it was all about understanding what best in class looked like, trying to get consistency across your brand, and then policing whether or not retailers were delivering that effectively, or whether or not you needed to speak to the retailer because they had the wrong content. I think we're starting to get much more sophisticated than that. The days of just checking that your product had an image and fixing it if it didn't are well and truly gone. And AI is starting to support that. So if we think about Gen AI, first of all, it's helping brands to, in real time, understand what's being said about their products and their competitor products. So taking sentiment analysis and bringing that into content. And based on that, it's enabling them to understand, is their best-in-class product name really still best in class? Or are there some keywords that shoppers are talking about relating to the product that are not contained within it and they're not using within it? So it's really changing the thinking on what great looks like from product content to make it not a fix it once and then check it's delivered, but something that's iterative and is adapting to shoppers and the way that they see products. That's the first part of it. But then the second is kind of, how do you deliver that and those changes to the retailer side? And that's where automation is starting to come in. So the ability to see what should be changed on a product name, for example, in real time, but then for the automation to be in place for that to actually change it not only in a brand's PIM, but also on the retailer side, is really starting to come through. And what those two things do together is they just massively speed up the whole and amplify the whole process, so that these changes are happening pretty much in real time. And that's where it's going. That's where we're heading towards.
Interesting. So we have the content part, we have retail media, we have data and analytics. Any other parts of being successful on the digital shelf that we haven't mentioned, or have we covered everything?
Not quite. I think one of the key ones, or the key one, is visibility. So we really need to think here hard about all of these, and that it's not a linear thing. These are all jigsaw puzzles, pieces that fit together. And having great content is likely to improve sales, and that's likely to improve visibility. But there are other things that you can take into account as well. So really having a coherent strategy across your power products for making sure they're visible in the areas that you expect them to be visible. It's no good running a retail media sponsored campaign against a keyword if your product doesn't appear on the shelf underneath. There's some work for you to do there first to bring the product up onto the shelf.
Yeah. So I think it's really interesting that we're kind of bringing together two of the points that you've mentioned, which is you've mentioned the importance of breaking through those organizational silos. So it's not just about the data silos, but it's about the organizations and the different teams that work on or across the digital shelf. And I'm curious to see, well, two things. One is, what are the strategies that you see that have worked in terms of being able to break down those organizational silos? And then two is, what role has technology played in making that happen, making that possible?
I've seen a number of different approaches to breaking down the silos, and all of them successful to a certain extent. I think what really works is giving the individual markets and teams the ability to flex, but with the overall framework in place. I think having some kind of a product champion for retail media, digital acceleration, etc., within a global team level, setting the standard, but also sharing best practice. So bringing together individual teams and markets in a way that they can follow an overall framework, but share best practice between themselves as well. Because while something that works in one market and one area may not be relevant for another, it really helps sharing it to really understand challenges and come up with similar solutions that might work in that case, and to bring everybody together to what around of the importance of having these strategies in place. So in summary, something that's a kind of a global or team champion or lead, but we're underneath with different markets and teams that are being brought together within that towards a common cause.
Mm-hmm. So with all this on the table that we've gone through, what are like the top 3 things, if you had to choose, that you would recommend brands to do as an e-commerce strategy for 2024?
I think the first thing is connect your data wherever possible. Bring all of your data together so you don't just have separate point solutions, but it's coming together onto a platform that enables you to see the full picture and drive efficiencies and use connected data to inform and support your strategy. That's the first thing, and it's quite a big task. The second thing is, as I've already said, bring your teams together. Make sure that they all understand what the overall strategy is and what their part is in that, and that they're delivering it against it. And then the third thing I think is it's a round of failing fast and learning. So I think it's having a strategy to test and learn, but also making sure everything you do is optimizable, measurable, actionable, so that you're learning quick and failing fast and moving on quickly too.
So this is the point where I think we ask you to look into your crystal ball, right? We've asked you about what are the things that we should be focusing on in the immediate future. But now I want to think about looking a little bit further ahead. What industry trends are you watching going into 2024 or beyond, and which are the ones you pay attention to, or you would suggest people pay attention to, or the ones you think maybe we should kind of cool our jets a little bit, maybe ignore?
I think the thing we're already starting to hear a lot about, and we're only going to hear more about, is understanding how we can deliver incremental ROAS as opposed to just ROAS. So I think that's super important as we move forward. As more budgets are switched from other areas into retail media, brands need to understand that's bringing them incrementality and it's not just cannibalizing for elsewhere. So retail media networks and solutions that enable you to really get to the heart of whether or not sales are incremental. That's what we're going to hear a lot more about as we move through the next 12 months. On the other side of things, maybe slightly controversially, I am less convinced that 20-minute online delivery, on-demand delivery, is particularly scalable currently for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, I think some of the companies are struggling to scale it. And, we've seen that in the Netherlands, for example, where they're not able to have so many different distribution centers in place. Secondly, it's still too patchy. It's very patchy. And I think sometimes we get really carried away with it. And we forget that unless you're in a specific postcode in a major city, it's not actually applicable to you. So,
and I would say, I guess for the latter too, is that I think understanding the relevant mission is really important from a shopper perspective, which is that, there is a certain subset of shoppers and on a certain subset of trips for whom that 20-minute delivery window is essential.
Yes.
For everybody else, perhaps a 1 hour or even longer window works also. So I think it's kind of understanding the size of prize of it as well.
Yeah, no, I would totally agree with that. And I think that's partly why it's not necessarily so scalable, because I think those use cases are currently, those shopper missions are currently relatively small in percentage number. I might be wrong. I've definitely been wrong before, but that's my view. It's a watch and review rather than a take action on at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, well, look, listeners have been very lucky. Now they know what they should have as a strategy for 2024, and they even know probably what's going to happen, right? So they have a lot of takeaways from this conversation. So Mandy, from back to the beginning of the conversation, you told us about your career, starting in publishing, and then all the work that you've done around the retail world for the last 20 years. If you had to go back to the beginning of your career, and with everything you've learned now, give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
It would be not to try to have everything planned out so much, I would say. You don't have to know where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. Embrace change as it comes in, because that could be the new exciting stuff you didn't know about when you first made your plan. Be prepared to do something different and be prepared to fail fast. But failing fast is not an excuse for giving up easily.
This was Mandy Critchley, Account Director at CommerceIQ. Efrain, what are your key takeaways from the conversation?
I think first and foremost, it was interesting to hear Mandy talk about the trends that she's observing in working with clients across the CommerceIQ database or of clients that they work with. So things like, for example, the acceleration of shoppers moving online and what that means in terms of driving profitability for your online delivery business, but also thinking about the emergence of new channels like quick commerce.
Yeah, and I think she mentioned like two key challenges they're finding, and one is data, and then the other is the internal structure, which I'm laughing because it's just so relevant. Internal structure, like really having like the different departments, sales, marketing, digital, on the same table on a regular basis. It's becoming super important.
Absolutely. And I think to me, what's interesting about what Mandy is saying is something that we're also seeing, and our friends across the pond, the CPG guys, have also been tackling, which is how do media and commerce come together? And oftentimes one way that happens is through the joint business planning that you do with your customers. So it's interesting that Mandy is having the same observation as well.
Yeah. And as we're going to a sophistication process of the online marketplace, she also referred to content, that it's not about having an image and a title. So in other words, it's just not about being out there. So she talked about like how AI, for example, can help brands understand what's being said about their products. So finding keywords to position them, and at the same time, create content on how to deliver your product. So create like generative AI type content. I'm not an expert, so I can't say the technical words, but I get what she says. And I think that it's very easy to understand. Then it's about making action from that.
Absolutely. And I think it's been an interesting evolution when you think about that, about content and how it's evolved from consistency, which is what I think a lot of people are still striving for, but I think, goes back a few years, to now thinking about governance, to this new world that we're exploring in terms of using AI to actually create content and optimizing it for the things you said.
Yeah. I'm even looking at AI to bring new content related to the podcast, by the way. And for 2024, she talked about, in terms of recommendations, I think it's always good to remember them, connecting data on one platform, bringing teams together, breaking silos, as we said, and then testing and learning, but making sure everything is optimizable, measurable, and actionable. Anything else we have to mention?
Absolutely. I think, what was interesting, she also said that a lot of brands are also thinking about the incrementality of their advertising spend. So being challenged to be able to produce a ROAS metric, return on advertising spend, so that they can see what's the incrementality that their different content or different initiatives are driving.
Excellent, Efrain. Thanks for your takeaways. There was a lot to take away, a lot to synthesize here. So thank you and congratulations as well. And thanks as well to our listeners. Hope you enjoyed this call and you had the same amount of takeaways we had. See you on the next episode of the FMCG Guys.